Thank you very much for taking the time to join the broadcast interview, where we explore the evolving landscape of scholarly communication. And today we're diving into the recognition of preprints and what they mean for research assessment, funding, and careers. And to start off, could you introduce yourself and tell our listeners about your background and current role?
Hi everyone. My name is Jakke Neiro. I'm a recent graduate from the University of Oxford from the ASAPbio lab. So I've been studying there for a PhD or DPhil as it is called in Oxford. And now I'm starting a postdoctoral position at the Karolinska Institutet in Stockholm, Sweden. And in the ASAPbio lab, I've been studying planarian regeneration. So planarians are flatworms that are highly regenerative. And now I'm then moving on to another model system. So now I will be focusing on salamanders and their regenerative capabilities. So that's in short, my background.
Thank you. Um, Starting with the first question, what do preprints mean to you, both personally and professionally? How do they fit into your work?
Well, preprints are to me publications as all other publications. But what makes preprints different, of course, it's the rapid dissemination of information. So it it's It's at the stage when the authors think it's ready, but okay, not necessarily the peer reviewers don't necessarily think so. But you think at least the authors and the scientists who have been doing the actual work, they think it's a coherent story now, and it's worth telling others that this is what we have found to inform both me in many ways that okay, this is what they are working on, this is something that I can rely on now, and build and simply learn the latest that is happening in my field.
And what challenges do you encounter or do you see others encounter when it comes to evaluating the impact, like, and also the quality of the preprints compared to the traditional peer-reviewed publications?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I feel when you have a preprint, then I think, either consciously or then unconsciously assess the impact based on the author's previous peer-reviewed publication. So if the preprint comes from a certain research group, they have usually then a track record of certain publications. And then, of course, researchers have both high impact and low impact publications, but low impact can mean a niche publication that is not glamorous or spectacular, but it's a solid piece of information anyhow. So without really having a then let's say peer review assessment, then I make the assessment myself and rely usually then on the previous work that has come out from the authors and from the research groups they are associated with. So let's say that's kind of the superficial quick assessment you can do. But then obviously if the preprint is really close to your field where you actually know the subject in greater detail, then you also have the competence, I would say, to really independently assess the quality of it. But as said, I read preprints both from those that are really adjacent to what I do, but also more broadly in developmental biology. And obviously, the further it is from my focus, then it becomes increasingly difficult really then to assess how solid and how high impact this work is.
It is known that there are some concerns about the credibility and also validation of findings released as preprints, especially in some sensitive fields such as medicine or health. How do you address this risk personally or within your institution?
Yeah, but that kind of it's kind of, yeah, related to what I said earlier. So there also I then rely on the track record of the those who are publishing the preprint. But then I also think, like, even though it is then peer reviewed and published in a journal, we still have these problems. It has gone through an additional phase of validation, but it doesn't mean like peer review is not perfect. So we also have retractions from those peer reviewed papers. So yes, I think it's like peer review adds validation, but it doesn't, that doesn't either solve it. So yes, there is a slight increased risk when it comes to preprints. that you have to be aware of. But I don't think it's, let's say, big enough or like serious enough for us to kind of now stop publishing preprints. So it relies also on the earlier publications that comes from the same authors and the same research groups.
Reflecting on your career so far, to what extent do you think preprints have influenced it? Has the influence been positive, negative, or a bit of both?
I think it's been net positive. I try to think even if it's been any negative. So I have a, let's say, so I have one from my PhD. I have one paper in eLife that we then published as a preprint before actually then sending it to review commons, and then from there further to eLife for then peer review. So yes, it I think in my case helped actually a lot because it we knew in this case that where others also working on this topic. So this was in many ways like telling others what we have done. So, there is no overlap in both many ways you can think of competition, but then of course you can also think like really constructively that if we are working on this and have done this much, it might not then make sense to do exactly the same thing. So, yes, it helped to spread the information 6 months earlier than if it had come as a then like if it had been first available as a peer-reviewed publication in eLife. Of course, we did not know when publishing as a preprint how long the peer review process was going then to take. But yes, actually in my case it helped to inform the planarian community what we have been doing for the last however maybe 4 years actually everything that goes into that paper and what we have found. And I think also the pandemic there had also an important factor because at that time, obviously, it was a bit general uncertainty in the air. So you were not certain so you did not know how long things are going to take, and all that added into the like process as well.
Based on your interactions with your peers, collaborators, supervisors, or even publishers, how would you say preprints are currently recognized and valued within your field?
I think they are valued, but then of course the question is like, are they valued as much as peer-reviewed, like really with the let's say seal of approval publications? No, they are not still. And though I think it's good that peer-reviewed publications have then are recognized more. It comes more than of course like a question of like relative terms, like how much if we have this publication, it is as a preprint, and then we get the peer-reviewed paper. So how many percent, it comes down to really to this, how much recognition does this does this preprint have of whatever is going to be the final product? And I think it's the really high already. So I think it's definitely over 50%. It's somewhere 60, 70, I think. Rough estimate how well it's recognized. And I think it's enough and it's really good. So I think the current situation is I feel taking into account all these different factors that it hasn't been yet peer reviewed, but it still contains all the, let's say, raw data, raw analysis, like the raw content. So it's the intellectual contribution is already there. So it should be recognized already to a great extent, and I feel it's already done. Maybe it could be even better, but I think science will learn over time how to recognize these. So I wouldn't be really actually that worried. I feel like we will get some system for assessing preprints that is improving all the time.
Cool question on this part. So regarding like peer review system, like how important do you think that is in terms of like publications? Or do you think there's actually some better system that can replace peer review system for assessments of preprints or publications in general?
This is a broad question. So I think everyone agrees with the problems of peer review, and then it comes down, I think, more like how and what kind of peer review, and we know that peer reviewers may have completely different opinions of things because things are not straightforward. And then comes, if you have like really contrasting peer review comments, like what do you do? Do you publish it based on them, like really from more the positive angle? And you know is it there's really like, do we want to optimize for getting information? Like it's like the optimization between the creative process versus like really the validation. Because if we are too stringent, nothing comes ever out. And is that like good? That's probably not the ideal situation that we select everything out from the system. But like we need, of course, like science needs to go forward, so we need papers and we need new findings published. On the other hand, then if it's too strict, and of course if it's like too loose, then we start to fill up the literature with something that is not valid. So okay, and where is now the golden middle road here? I think it's I think I think it's a good direction that many journals have taken to have like the peer review comments then published online with the article, because this for like if the peer review so yes, the peer review is anonymous, but if the peer reviewer knows that the comments will be public, then I think it's inherently forces the peer review to be qualitative, like more qualitative if it stays just behind closed doors. So yes, the peer review needs also to be public. I think this is like the peer review comments, and this is kind of one way of improving the process, because then you can also peer review peer review comments, and if those are, let's say, strictly not professional, let's say, then you kind of also see like that it's not valuable. So I feel making the peer review comments public is one way of improving this, and I think that's what many journals have been doing. Then we have like eLife, which has this new model, which is kind of just publishing the peer review comments and then making like they don't make a decision like binary that it's published or not. It's like we got these comments and now we make this assessment, and then they have this summary of the findings, which is kind of interesting. Or I don't know, interesting, but at least kind of they follow this model, but okay, they follow this into like really one direction in maximum terms. So I think we still though need kind of a binary decision somewhere that this is what this journal thought is worth publishing. But then and then we have these kind of comments. So I think that's though going to be kind of the maybe best model forward.
And moving on to a bit about the policy of like preprints, do your institution have a specific policy regarding the recognition of preprints? And if so, how do you put this in practice and what impacts have you observed so far?
This is a good question. This is like my institution. So I'm now starting at Karolinska, so I don't know about their policy. And now I'm thinking if I actually knew what was the policy in terms of preprints at the University of Oxford, certain kind of fellowship that I have been applying for or planning to apply for. So they have outlined these policies that you need, that sometimes a preprint that is equal to or is taken into consideration under the same terms as something that has been peer reviewed and published. So I know at least in these fellowship policies, this is usually taken into account and it's usually also outlined. Some have, let's say, quality, or they have like different levels here. So like publishing, so some of these strictly require it to, if it's a preprint, that it has to be like it need to be published as a preprint, but also then submitted to a journal, and then it qualifies as publication that has been then peer reviewed and is published formally. So I'm aware of those, and I think it's, well, first of all, it's good that these policies are then transparently outlined. So, and I think usually I would say those policies are good. So I think most of them take into account the preprints. If it requires it's submitted to a journal or not, I mean that's not much work. Like not much additional work. It's putting the preprint together that is the most laborious task of it. So I think so. I'm actually best aware of those. Then I think if there have been institutional policies in terms of how I can rely on preprints in my own work, and I think it's been not strictly kind of policy. It's more been like let's say, common academic sense when it's kind of been framed that if you think the preprint is, you know, credible and you think it helps your intellectual work, then of course, I mean, it's also not, I would say, ethical not to cite a preprint if it actually, forms or like helps your work. So in that respect, I don't think that I have been actually seen strict policies. It's more been kind of general common sense that if you think it's something that you can rely on, then use it and use your own judgment. So that's what I'm actually aware of, I think, policy-wise.
Moving on to like training, have you received any training on using or evaluating preprints? If not, how do you learn about this?
Yeah, now I'm think, have I actually received formal training? So I would say I have received formal training into, let's say, critical reading of papers, which then I guess takes into account also the preprints, but not like specifically preprints, which is actually a really interesting then point here. So like how do you read a preprint versus then a published peer-reviewed article, and what are these additional factors you should take into account? And I don't think I have actually received a formal training into this subject. It's then been learning by doing process in this case. So by reading the preprints that have come out from familiar labs, then you learn. So there are these certain preprints that I've seen when they came out, let's say the first version online as a preprint. Some labs are, let's say, have this as their standard way of operating, that they publish everything as preprints. And then you see that sometimes they have updated the preprint into version 2 or version 3, but usually just a few additional versions. And then you kind of see the final paper. And I don't think usually in this process that there's usually what is the peer review I feel what the peer review system does it actually like adds usually information into it, but it doesn't really like shift the meaning much. Like there's like general polishing, but it doesn't like drastically, at least from those labs that I've been reading the preprint from, so it doesn't overturn like sections from the preprint. Um, so also based on this, I become, let's say, how should I say? I trust the preprints from these certain then groups, and I kind of can like roughly estimate now also what is probably going to be then amended in the final published version. Um, so yes, I haven't. I don't think I have. So in short, I don't think I have received a formal training, and it's been learning by doing.
What actions then the organization or like the broader academic community can take to further normalize and incentivize the inclusion of preprints in research evaluation, grant application, or academic promotion?
So I think it comes down. So we still, at least like in then biology, like the expectation is that preprints are, well, okay, maybe, yeah, we call them preprints because we expect them to be then peer reviewed and published. But then I know, in physics and some other fields, like it's like, you can publish the preprint. And I've seen some preprints so there's this one in, okay, that's more in evolutionary biology and ecology. But there's this one preprint that the author wrote that, yeah, I wrote this, but it became much longer than what the journal intended to have in the end. But I think it's really good. So I put it here now as a preprint. This was meant to be an article, but then because it's much longer than what I misread the instructions, it's much longer than what the piece they wanted. So now I put it as a preprint here, which is kind of interesting. So it was, and he hasn't like then published it. That's same version now anywhere, and kind of transparently said that I don't really intend to do it now any longer because I do something else. So then we have these certain preprints out there without then necessarily any intention of being published anywhere, but they're still then really good. And I think here comes something of what we might need to normalize is kind of citing preprints also, let's say this, I mean, so if you have a preprint and then it becomes the like a peer-reviewed published publication, then obviously you then cite the publication rather than the preprint if it then comes out. But if you have these certain preprints that clearly seem to not get published ever anywhere, but clearly then are solid for whatever reasons, there can be these interesting reasons that I mentioned. So we need to kind of normalize, if you use it, then cite it. And if you like, then it's, an intellectual contribution that you have relied on informing your ideas or your work. And then it's come from an author that has many, peer-reviewed publications, and in all ways, it's kind of equivalent functionally as a peer-reviewed publication. Then we should normalize, using this and cite it and value and treat it as a de facto peer-reviewed publication. And that's something I think we still need to. These preprints are rare. Uh, I think obviously because usually people then want to get them published and then they become published then somewhere at some point. But then we have these certain for various reasons that might not be then ever published, but they are still valuable work. So we need to kind of normalize these aspects of preprints. And I think in physics and some of these like really rapidly moving parts of computer science, this is, kind of the field has moved so quickly that you get like these preprints. And it might already be, uh, old in this like one, year cycle if it goes through like this. So then there is kind of normal to sometimes even rely on these preprints or like again in computer science you also have these conference proceedings which is kind of also equivalent. So we need it at least in biology kind of normalize this aspect of this. That's kind of one aspect I.
I have a follow-up question on this part. So, as we know, assessment of a scholar or like the recognition of a scholar is like quite closely tied to their research publication or impact factors or the name of the journals. So, I would like to have your views on like research assessment, like more broadly. Do you think the current system needs some change, or do you think this is like the golden kind of like rule that we should like follow on in terms of like assessing research and also assessing a scholar?
I feel like I've been following these discussions, and in the end, I feel it kind of always leads into this. It's kind of, people don't like elite publications, and I think they kind of have their problems in terms of now the submission fees and all of that, but that's kind of a related problem. So into those how those then operate. But I think, if we want to have elite science, kind of it automatically leads to that we have elite publications. I mean, so if we, theoretically just decide, okay, nature is not the elite platform now, and we decide it's like something else, but then that something else becomes the next elite platform and it becomes a gatekeeper. So I don't think we will ever kind of reach some maybe ideal situation, or it's kind of somehow inherently part of the system. If we want elite science and top science, we need, I mean, that will lead to top journals or top platforms, you know, that that select the material and say this is top material. So I think it's kind of inevitable in many ways. I mean we don't like it, but I think it's like the inevitable consequence of in however we design the system. I mean the same with we can think of, okay, we have the journals. We could think of a completely different system where instead, for example, the universities published their research. Like we don't have journals. If you have working at university, the university has some outlet and you publish your work there. Okay, it would be kind of a different system. But then this would lead to that we have, top universities and then the top university outlets. And then we would have, de facto again these elite journals. Uh, okay, and also then if in this case, as I said, like if we decided to publish everything as preprints, uh, and then it comes from different labs, and then as I told you, I assess it based on the track record of the group. So then we have these elite groups, and then over time it would lead to somehow these elite groups forming their own platform. If the bioarchive becomes then like there's too many low standard preprints, then this would evolve into some other systems. I think it's kind of inherently we will kind of see this system. But what I think though, like this is So we have these top journals and top outlets, and in some way, and I think that's kind of just a sad inherent part of this system. However, we have like this, like these top journals, they kind of assess like a priori the worth of this work. And then we have like, let's say, a posteriori, like what kind of impact it had in the end, as in the citations. Of course, citations, you can cite something and say this is, bad, but at least it had kind of an impact then. So yes, citations are not kind of, uh, they don't capture maybe the quality always kind of completely linearly, but I would say like if you really take rough estimates, yes, they do. Like, so then we have these kind of articles that are in not top, let's say, top journals, but then become, because they are good and valuable and impactful and so on, become cited a lot over time. And I feel, you know, like we have to kind of take into account these two dimensions of it. So yes, I feel the top journals they assess like at the moment, and it's of course imperfect the process, but this is kind of, this is valuable and impactful content at the moment. But we always, of course, can't predict the future. So sometimes we have those that were kind of, you would say then afterwards unfairly treated. Okay, those were more impactful that we realized at the moment. So we have to kind of, for then assessing the the as I said, like the impact or the value, however you phrase it, the like of scholars, I feel we need to take these both metrics into account. However, I think we kind of do at the moment in many ways. So we have kind of the journal kind of impact factor, but we also take into account the citations. Okay, but these are just the two metrics. So I follow from this. So we have these. So then we can add in like more other metrics. I feel okay, the citations, but then you can maybe have some qualitative kind of citation score, which I don't think we maybe use that much, but maybe we could. So, I mean, we have the like raw number of citations, but if you have like, let's say we have like a preprint that is then cited in a Nature paper, so then we see already that this kind of in what you would call it, like its impact factor citation is really then great if it's cited then in a high impact journal. And this is kind of an additional metric we could put into this kind of how we assess kind of scholars and their work. That okay, we have the raw number of citation, but if it's like then if that paper was published in a non-high impact journal, but then it becomes cited in high impact venues, then it's clearly somehow really good. Maybe we didn't realize at the time. So this kind of qualitative citation score is something we could add more as a, let's say, metric that we use. So I think we need to kind of use these metrics that take into account really at the moment, a priori, what he thought was the quality of this work. But it's also not, I mean, this like impact, as in it's like a new great finding, but it can also be low impact, but really solid. But anyhow, we have these different metrics that take into account, I feel. So we need, in short, metrics that take into account many different aspects. And then, I mean, yes, it's imperfect, but I think if we have a lot of different metrics, let's say, at least like some main ones, usually the average is kind of close to the truth. So yes, it's sometimes like but over time, these will kind of, I think, reflect pretty well the kind of the real perceived value of the work.
Based on that, do you think that there should be some sort of standards or gatekeeping for like preprints? What kind of things you recommend for like gatekeeping, you think?
Yeah, I think, and I feel bioRxiv has certain gatekeeping. So if I remember correctly, bioRxiv, I mean, there's some, let's say, really kind of straightforward technical ones. I think bioRxiv says that it has to be written in English, what you put in here, and so on. And they go through, yes, that it's. I mean, like it could. If yes, I mean, I think it's we don't realize what it could lead to if we don't have any gatekeeping. Then it becomes like some social media where you can put like post anything. And that's not what we want. So we want something that goes through some superficial check. Yes. So yes, it comes. Um, that's a kind of a good question. That does it. So yes, so superficially at least, I mean, you can go through like like really, I would say, broadly the structure. Like it has an abstract and it's written in English and it's kind of, has like, it's not just one, okay. Sometimes maybe one paper, like one page can be enough, but in math, maybe if it's a good proof, but you can go through like these really superficial things that it has, like it's kind of coherent sentences, and has a structure and let's say looks as a scholarly article. So some type of this gatekeeping I think we need. I'm not kind of then though a fan of like some like which I know maybe some of these preprint platforms are strict that it needs to come from, for example, a university affiliated group. So, you could then, like, if you have someone independently doing scholarly work, you know, for example, in taxonomy, you describe some species and come from let's say, a country where you don't have access to all institutions, and then you want to publish this. I think we need to kind of take this also into account. So gatekeeping, not, I think like this institutional attachment that is sometimes seen in this is something we also need to think carefully about, especially like in biology, because we have, a huge diversity of life. And then if someone does like really niche solid work, describe the morphology of an, insect taxon, valuable work. They might do it even as a hobby, but it's still like hobby entomology. So we need also that. So this kind of institutional gatekeeping kind of, I'm not a fan of that. I think it's like really has to be kind of tied to the content. Uh, and I feel working now well enough. So yes, there is, especially like, of course, we had COVID and there was a lot of COVID related preprints. Um, but then, I mean, at least in my field, I haven't like really seen the problem that there would be like too much noise in the system. So I think the current gatekeeping practices are working. That you look through the superficially, that it's readable. It kind of forms a story, and it's kind of English, and kind of see it as sentences, and it's not like some, and it looks like science. Yes. So this kind of like, but checks we need.
So we have discussed a bit on the like gatekeeping in like the publisher or like server side. So I'm now interested to learn more about like an individual or like institution side of things. So how do you or your institution ensure that preprints are discoverable, properly cited, or accessible?
Think now. I don't think I have maybe experienced that kind of gatekeeping. You mean like someone who would, yeah. So based on my own experience then as a PhD student, I didn't face any kind of gatekeeping that, the preprint that we had that then led to an eLife article. So it was, visible online on bioRxiv, and I was free to promote it on Twitter, I guess, at the time where there was still some people following kind of academic discourse and so on. So I didn't face any gatekeeping there, and I think it also was included then also on the departmental website, where we list kind of the publications from the group. And it was also listed there. So there was no gatekeeping. It was actually then active, then I guess promotional. It was like included there. So far I haven't kind of seen any gatekeeping. On the contrast, actually, I would say active then promotion of them, then being included alongside peer-reviewed publications on the same list of publications online.
Yep, that's great. And looking into the future, it seems that preprints are becoming more mainstream. What possibilities do you envision for research assessment in a preprint-based publishing system?
I think it's democratizes sciences. At least it has the potential. So, okay, yes, internet access is not actually like not everyone has access to internet, but I would say if you don't have that, then you don't have access to science in general. So if you do, so I think it's, yes, helps those who are doing, I would say, these like valuable small studies, which we so far have kind of, assessed that it's not kind of maybe worth going to a journal, but it's kind of nothing wrong with it. It's kind of so kind of small kind of piece of information. And especially in biology, there's so many like so much you could describe, and I mean, then you can argue, was it like worth describing it? But then if it's something has already been done, I think this is kind of really opens up a platform for these like really small scale studies that you can put out there. Like, you can do small descriptions of some biological phenomenon, like in one organism that might not like relate to general biological theory really greatly or like add anything new, but it might be like really valuable if you're studying one specific organism group. So that information might be valuable at some point. And then because a lot of these like journals, like the problem, uh, like high impact then journals, rightly or wrongly, then ask usually then for more work and more validation. And then comes which is good many times. But sometimes then, the some researcher might not then they might not prioritize that at the moment, or they might not have the resources and so on. But they still have this kind of section of information. And then for getting it published somewhere, they would need to add something on it. And then comes the question, is it then better that that never becomes published, that one section, because it was not then validated or some other was added on it? Or if someone then puts it as a preprint and someone else can do the validation later. So I think this is something I think we should maybe take advantage of, and also, you know, help with the I don't know if it actually how big the replication crisis is, but I think we could use the preprints also for this kind of, adding more replicates, which kind of might seem them boring, but they might be, there's like valuable and solid. So we could take advantage of the preprints in like for this as well. So I think we could, yes, I think we could more like boldly use the preprints kind of for looking into these dimensions, um, that we can have these kind of yes kind of pieces of scholarly work that don't necessarily then qualify as a published and peer-reviewed preprint because the amount of information is so low, like additional impact is so low, but it's still kind of a solid, there's like nothing as in it there's nothing wrong with it. So I think we could kind of, I see a future where we kind of realize this better and take advantage of the preprint platforms and the system for this better. So that's kind of one something that comes to mind.
Yeah, you have raised a really good point about the replication and also replicates, because like the current system is mainly focusing on like new discoveries rather than like going back to the previously published stuff and then like trying to see if they are really working or whether the discovery is true or not.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a really good point. Um, how might this preprint focus model diverge from the traditional journal-based approach to research evaluation and dissemination?
If it actually, so yes, like the traditional system used to be quicker, I think, because like the peer review, like at least in biology, I would say like the articles used to be shorter because I mean kind of science progresses, so the technology is improved, so we have like more technologies now. So there's like more you can put into the articles, and they become like technically longer and so on, which means also kind of the peer review becomes longer. So that like traditional system is kind of like the traditional system has new problems now. So and that's kind of the lag and how long it can take for peer review. Kind of, and of course it might then be rejected and then it goes to another journal and so on. So like really the time it takes to get something out is longer. And the preprints, of course, adds here like I guess what we also started in this discussion, like really the speed of dissemination of information, and it adds like really this kind of aspect here, and that is kind of I think helping, yes, early career researchers in their careers, like they get their work published sooner rather than later, and they get the recognition sooner rather than later. So that helps in their careers. But then I also wish to think of, like the general good, like it's good that we get information out there. And I feel, the pandemic was a great example of this, how it helped. And I think like the net effect was positive. Yes, it also we had then the discussions like it is not peer reviewed yet, like this preprint that comes out on COVID. So it might not be reliable, and how it's kind of affecting policy and so on, and is it can we rely on it now to have form policy? But I think the net effect we saw there was positive. So we got the information out there quicker, and yes, like that is the where preprints in terms of the traditional system, or I think it also kind of hopefully motivates the traditional system to kind of make the process quicker or look over the practices, like how much can we peer review and like, if something, or can it like the peer review process kind of be something like made more automatic or something like that. But anyhow, so it kind of, I think the preprints, on one hand, yes, they make the dissemination quicker, but they hopefully also they motivate the traditional system to kind of evolve and shape their practices.
And I guess moving on to like the final part about like how these changes can take place. Have you or your organization engaged with the national or international initiatives such as the DORA, which is the Declaration on Research Assessment, or CORA, hopefully I pronounce it correctly, is the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment that address the role of preprints in research assessment reform?
Good question. I don't think so. I haven't personally engaged with these organizations, and I don't think my group or my institution has at least not then informed me how or engaged me in in the process. So I'm not actually really aware. So personally, I haven't, and I don't think my institution have been that visible either. At least maybe not then at I think at university level, but it has not then been visible to me at the, let's say, more department level as a practicing scientist.
I guess like one final follow-up question on this part. So when you're thinking about change, how you envision that to take place? Is it like bottom up or like top down or like a bit of both?
Yeah, so bottom up, I guess, means like the researchers, the scientists driving the change, and top down somehow the gatekeepers, whoever they now are, I guess, the publications and they forming. Yes, I think there's like this, what I think would be better, but what I also think is realistic. Okay, I don't know. I think in this case it's both. So I think I mean, we need both like these from top down and bottom up movements. Um, and I kind of still think usually those who are whatever, yes, we have kind of the journals, yes, top journals. But I think like, yes, the average, I think, yes, I think top scientists have earned their position to some extent. So I'm not, sometimes I feel I hear this, okay, it's kind of, like you get somehow because of connections, whatever. I don't think you can rely on that overall in science. So yes, I feel those who are publishing in top journals and those who end up in kind of, let's say, gatekeeping roles, they earn that to some extent. So because they are good scientists, and it's kind of, and then we have kind of, they kind of come into this position, and okay, so then they have the power, and yes, so I think they can drive change to some extent and should drive change to some extent, uh, because they come there, as I said, because they are top scientists. So then they are then good scientists. So they also know a lot about science, kind of as a consequence. So I think yes, we need kind of the gatekeepers to kind of actively uh, ensure that good, like genuinely good quality work is not gate kept, and science is based on the content of the science and not kind of the affiliations and so on. So it's they are, but I think they are generally also doing a kind of genuinely at least want to accomplish this. Okay, then the bottom up. So I think like what as an individual scientist what you can do. I think I mean um, so yes, kind of. If we want system change, we are all kind of part of the system, so it comes like from individual change. So yes, if you and you have like some individual power that you can do in terms of now then preprint. So if you read something that is good, you know, cite it. So cite preprints. Okay, of course, if it later becomes published, then cite that because it's kind of is more coherent. But anyhow, you have the power to kind of do your own work and kind of give recognition when you do to others when you do that. So recognizing the preprints, then I think also, of course, you decide if you publish something as a preprint or not. And I would say then at the moment, most scientists kind of they don't refrain from publishing their work as preprints. And most actually, I think it's at least in my field and my niche really commonplace now to publish them as preprints, like their work initially as preprints. So you can drive, of course, like individually, change, and do I would say do great science, then you become a top scientist, and then you end up in these kind of gatekeeping roles. I think it's kind of maybe I'm optimistic, but I still think you can work yourself up in this kind of system, and then you can drive greater change if you kind of see some problem. So yeah, that's so yes, bottom up, top down, both both are key ingredients of driving change.
Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your valuable perspective on the evolving role of preprints in research assessment, funding, and career development. So thank you very much for that.